that this love that I have, yeah, the world didn't give it to me. Singing, the world didn't give it, the world can't take it away. This pride that I have, this pride that I have, this pride that I have. Oh yeah, now the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it to me. This pride that I have. I said the world didn't give it to me. Don't you know that this pride that I have, yeah, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, I said the world didn't give it, the world can't take it away. All this peace that I have, oh, yeah. The world didn't give it to me. The world didn't.
So, Begum, shall we begin? Yes.
Yes, sure.
Fantastic. So I see that more people are coming in and probably there will be others joining us, but I already see so many friends from all over the world joining us today, and it's really a great honor to have you all here. You may have read in the chat and in the on the screen that there will be recording for this meeting. If you would not like to be recorded, you can change your name and keep your camera off, although the recording will mainly be of the speakers, but you are welcome to stay out of it in the way that you see fit. So, my name is Ayşe Altınay, and on behalf of SUGender, the Sabancı University Gender and Women's Studies Center, I would like to say welcome to you all for this very special event, bringing together dear Arlene Avakian, Cynthia Enloe, Deniz Kandiyoti, and Shaharzad Akbar. I am so excited about this evening's conversation. This is really a dream constellation of feminist visionaries who have each touched many lives, including mine. Generously sharing wisdom and enacting solidarity through research, teaching, advising, writing, citing, and acting in the most empowering and insightful ways. And I feel privileged to have been on the receiving end of these amazing acts of solidarity. For how we have come to this event as SUGender, every year as we prepare for March 8th, we pick a theme around which we organize a number of events, bringing together academics, students, and others in different formats of feminist solidarity. In Turkish, we use the hashtag Dayanışma yaşatır, which has been a very important hashtag in recent years. And it's very hard to translate into English as it connects, but it's a beautiful hashtag and a beautiful announcement statement that connects solidarity with life. It marks solidarity as life-giving, life-affirming, life-enhancing, life-supporting, life-serving, an act that does all this, as an act that is alive and that is full of possibilities. So today's event is called Feminist Plus Solidarity, and I want to say a few words about the plus and how it connects to our earlier conversations, to the earlier events and gatherings that we've had where we've discussed feminist solidarity during this past month. We, as the collective that organized today's event from Sugender, we wanted to add the plus as a reminder and as an invitation, not as a definition or a definitive statement of any sort. We see the plus as a reminder of the many other frameworks of analysis and action that helped feminism grow. The anti-racist, anti-slavery, and anti-war movements that were accompanying the first waves of feminism, the civil rights, anti-colonial, human rights, minority rights, and racial justice movements that have accompanied particularly the second wave of feminisms around the world, the LGBTIQ plus and queer movements and theories that have deepened our understanding of the workings of gender and sexuality, the ecological and now climate justice movements that remind us of our interconnectedness, not just with each other, but with all species, with all of life. So the plus is a reminder of how feminisms have been enriched and transformed by these other struggles for a more just, equal, safe, and free world, a world of infinite possibilities and creativity, and not one of our beautiful diversity as the subjects of feminism, of the intersectionality that was always there, but perhaps not always visible or central. And the plus we see also is a reminder of what we don't know and what we remain curious about. And Cynthia and Enloe here often reminds us of the beauty of feminist curiosity. So the plus is an invitation to see feminism as an open-ended vision that serves all life, as a vision that assumes plurality, interconnectedness, and everything else that comes with it. As Dina Georges reminds us in this beautiful book, I had it right here, The Better Story, there's always a better story than our better story. So the plus in the Feminist Plus Solidarity is an invitation for opening ourselves up personally and collectively to a better story of feminism, one that is shaped by curiosity, openness, creativity, and modesty. So our title, Feminist Plus Solidarity, is an invitation to imagine an even better story of feminist solidarity. At least that's how
yardımcı oluyor.
propose it for our discussion today. And we are delighted that there are so many of us gathered today to discuss this with four incredibly inspiring feminist visionaries whose presence here and whose presence with us through the years at Sugender and in Turkey have been acts of solidarity. And each one of you have also
varlıklarıyla ve tabii ki kendi hayatlarında da dayanışmayı hayata geçirdiler. Şimdi onları
more about what solidarity means for you at this point in your life and how we can collectively look into the future. I'm not going to introduce our speakers as they don't need an introduction, and there wouldn't be enough time to really do justice to introducing them. So what we will do today is we will go through 3 rounds with 3 questions, having each person speak for about 5 minutes. And at the end of these 3 rounds, we will welcome questions from the audience. But in the meantime, my colleagues have already shared a link to the Mentimeter, the Menti interface, where you can put in your own associations with solidarity. And Begüm and Nazlı will be putting together these words for us in the form of a word cloud. So we'll be seeing what we share in terms of our associations of solidarity. And there's also a link to, there will be a link to a Jamboard where you are also invited to share your own answers to the questions that we'll be discussing with our guests today. So I will start with the first question. First of all, a deep gratitude to dear Arlene, Cynthia, Deniz, and Shaharzad for being with us. It's so exciting to have you with us and to have you in conversation with one another. We have been so inspired with each and every one of you, and having you together is really a dream tonight. So the first question that we wanted to put on the table for this conversation is, what does Feminist Plus Solidarity mean for you? And how do you see its place in contemporary politics and in contemporary feminist politics in particular? And I will start with Arlene. We'll go alphabetically.
Okay, I'm really delighted to be here, and I want to thank Sugender for the opportunity to be on this amazing roundtable. As one of the founders of Women's Studies at UMass, and then the chair, I've always been impressed with the work Sugender does with teachers, corporations, as well as in many research projects, currently 5 Horizon EU projects. These activities have always been impressive, but they've grown enormously since Hülya Adak became director. So thanks to Hülya and Ayşe and everyone else who makes Sugender such a great asset to Sabancı and the rest of us. I continue to learn so much from you. My comments will focus on the US and its history and how it affects the ability of white women to be in solidarity with Black and other women of color and people of color in general. The foundations of the US are based in genocide, free land, and slavery, free labor, which produced the richest country in human history by the 19th century. The US was what Michel Rouf-Trio would call a slave society. The institutions in a slave society developed within the context of slavery, protecting slavery and the planter class that enslaved people. Our constitution, the legal system, the banking system, the accounting system, the police, the taxation system, the particularly brutal form of capitalism in the US must be understood in the context of a slave society. Slavery shaped the US, and we are still living with the institutions the slave society created. On some level, I think we know some of this. Stephen Lindquist, who begins his book, Exterminate All the Brutes, with the extraordinary paragraph, which I'm going to quote here, quote, "You already know enough, so do I. It is not knowledge we lack. What is missing is the courage to understand what we know and to draw conclusions," end of quote. We in the US know that our country perpetrated a genocide on the indigenous people and that slavery was the basis of our economy, beginning in 1619, formally ending with the defeat of the Confederacy 246 years later. We also know that Black people lived under slave-like conditions for almost another century until the Civil Rights Movement forced the enactment of laws to grant citizen rights to Black Americans. We know this, but we do not have the courage to draw the conclusion that white supremacy is foundational to the US. White women, including feminists, are not exempt from this willful blindness. We were talking before about how complicated solidarity is. So I took a very generic definition of solidarity to begin my talk here. Solidarity is defined as, quote, an awareness of shared interests, objectives, standards, and sympathies, creating a psychological sense of unity of groups or classes. But what does it take to first have an awareness of shared interest and then to act on it? I begin with awareness because those of us who belong to racially advantaged groups have to work very hard to develop the awareness that white supremacy is the basis of our world and that we benefit from it. And that takes work, intellectual and emotional, a lot of it, and it is ongoing, lifelong, I would say. Black and other women of color in the US have been making the point that their world is fundamentally shaped by gender and race since at least the 19th century. And they continued to speak to white women's liberationists in the 20th and the 21st centuries. As early as the earliest women's studies programs and women liberation groups, women such as Frances Beale, the Combahee River Collective, June Jordan, and legions of others tried to show white women they needed more than a solely gender analysis, that it is an insufficient analytic frame to study any women. Building on the work of these Black thinkers and activists, Kimberly Crenshaw theorized Black women's structural position as defined by both gender and race and coined the term intersectionality in two powerful articles published in the late 1980s. While intersectionality has become a buzzword, the fundamental insight it brings to analysis of Black women's structural position is often reduced to identity politics, which is not at all what Crenshaw posited. The point of intersectional analysis is about power, which is also sometimes obscured by white scholars. Historically in the US, very few women were in solidarity with Black and other women of color. And not having a widespread and robust solidarity has cost the feminist movement so much. We have not done the work to have an awareness of the lives of women of color because, I would argue, we have not had the courage to draw the conclusions from slavery, genocide, and the powerful white supremacy that continues to shape our world. This history is not limited to people of color. It is US history, and we need to know it to know ourselves. The kind of awareness I'm talking about is not about inclusivity. It is about seeing that white supremacy has been a force in the US for 4 centuries and is alive and well today. And unless we are resisting and combating it, we are also perpetuating it. How much feminist activism is based on awareness that white supremacy threatens and has always threatened democracy? Yes, many whites, including many white women, marched with Black Lives Matter after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery were brutally murdered. But we have yet to see whether white supremacy will be centered along with other social formations in feminist activism and scholarship. Whites will not be able to be in coalition or solidarity with Blacks and other people of color unless they are able to center white supremacy in the society and in ourselves. In order to do that, we need deep knowledge of our white supremacist history, the institutions that developed in a slave society, and the courage to face that. Only then will we be able to be in a productive and effective solidarity.
Thank you so much, Arlene, for this really awakening mirror about white supremacy and power and intersectionality. So, Cynthia, shall we continue with you? What does
Hi, everybody.
it mean for you?
Hi, it's as Arlene said, and as Denise and Shaharzad said earlier, we're all so lucky to be with you. And it's all thanks to you that you're knitting us all together. Just starting with the first question, I get uncomfortable with the word solidarity because it sounds solid. And I don't think of solidarity as either stationary or solid. I think those of us who yearn for a stationary given solidarity that is solid will be constantly disappointed. And out of our disappointment will be alienated. And out of our alienation, we will drop out of the solidarity. And so my English isn't good enough, and certainly my Turkish doesn't exist. So I don't know how to do this, but maybe those of you who are in the chat room and you're writing things on this wonderfully creative board, we're going to need you, you know. So is there such a word as solidarification? Solidarization. You know, some of you know this. I love, in English, I love ization words, anything with I-Z-A, because it says it's in motion. It says it's a process that can start well and stop. That's the bad things can be started and rolled back, but also good things, such as building awareness, building solidarity, building trust. I think a lot about trust. I think a lot about distrust. And so I guess for me, to start us off in my own modest thinking here is to think about something in motion that can be built upon or reversed, can last for maybe an important moment of feminist solidarity, and then comes unraveled. I'm very interested, it's a terrible word. I'm determined to understand the unraveling, where things seem to be on the road towards building a trust, building, as Arlene said, a mutual awareness, an understanding of shared. And shared is really another really complicated understanding of our shared interests, and then can come undone. And it comes undone, and I know we'll all talk about this, because there are so many people in the world and so many interests in the world that have a stake in solidarity based on feminist understandings of the inner workings of misogyny, patriarchy, racism, all kinds of colonialism, not just the kinds of colonialism we study in school. That there's so many interests in the world that have a stake in those coming undone, of not being sustainable. So I think in my little opening here, I would say, first of all, solidarity is a process. It is a very iffy, uncertain process. It takes many people in the process simultaneously. It takes sustainability, which again doesn't happen on a Tuesday morning. It is ongoing. Going means stamina, and we can come back to this. I think feminist stamina is oftentimes underappreciated. How long do you hang in there with people who don't trust you? And I know all of us and all of 88 of you that are listening in, I bet all of you have an example of where you tried to build trust and the people you were trying to build trust with just didn't trust you. And the solidarity was always weak or maybe fell apart because people just never learned to trust you. And out of that, you sometimes, I sometimes, we sometimes gave up and thought, well, we'll just have a narrower basis for activism, a narrower basis for understanding. So the process, the stamina, the uncertainty, that to me are the highlights of feminist plus solidarity.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Maybe at some point we can also reflect about the Turkish word dayanışma, which is quite different from the English one. So maybe in the discussion section, and there are people here who speak other languages, so it would be great to reflect on the different languages, how they define solidarity. Thank you so much. Deniz, Kandiyoti.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, as usual, Sugender does that, to reflect on a concept which I now realize I'm feeling very conflicted about. So I took up your invitation to be as personal as you like about this by trying to explain how I went from youthful confidence to a much more conflicted old and middle age. to situate myself, I was an undergraduate in Paris during the 68 student events, and then moved on to the London School of Economics as a graduate student with more student events. The anti-Vietnam War protests shortly followed. And for me, there was a moment of great clarity. I knew what the goals were, who the enemy was, etc. And I would say, though, contra Arlene, that feminism did not come out of an awareness of shared interest at that point, but an awareness of being left out. Because most of the initial feminist movements, as you know, were the civil rights movement, etc., and suddenly realized that these progressive politics excluded them. Their place was at the photocopier and the coffee machine, as you will remember. So I started out, with a clear sort of globalist, internationalist, etc. agenda. And then I will have to fast forward because my moment of, I'm not going to say realization, but greatest discomfort came in Afghanistan when I started working there in 2002, right after the fall of the Taliban, after the US armed intervention. My dear departed friend, a wonderful feminist, an Iranian feminist, Parveen Paidar, was then at the head of UNIFEM. And I joined her there. And this is when something started happening in academia that was very troubling. Now, what was it? The many feminists in the North, and I'm talking about big names now, Marion Young, Judith Butler, etc., of course, were against the intervention and in fact said that it was a form of cultural imperialism. Here were neocons who had nothing to do with feminism suddenly attacking a country, and one of the main one of the flags of the invasion was they were going to save Afghan women, right? So what happened, however, there was that this prism of imperialism and anti-war, etc., suddenly created a category of women called Muslim women, right? Saving Muslim women. There's even a whole book by Laila with that title. And there I was looking for these Muslim women and not finding them, because what I found in Afghanistan was a very politicized society where women was as politicized and fragmented as anywhere else in the world. Some of them were former cadres of the PDPA. They were in the communist parties. Others were with Mujahideen factions. Some of them were royalists. They were totally, they had different ideas. And so the question was, what in this context does solidarity actually mean, okay? And what do you do? And I realized then that we have to regain this notion of political solidarity. There are many definitions of solidarity. Social solidarity, you can find that in families, civic solidarity. Now, what is political solidarity? On what basis do you find common platforms? And this is when I started getting very angry at Western women from their isolation, telling Afghan women that they're sellouts if they want CEDAW, for example, or if they want, Western conventions and so on. And I decided that you form solidarity everywhere on the same basis, that there are Afghan women I would rather be solidary with than American women if they're pro-life, right-wing Republicans. So I would say that my entire view of solidarity changed. And because of that, it broadened in a sense, because that meant that people who were not women or did not either could be included if they shared a similar political platform. And I think ever since, I have been moving more and more in that direction of who are we meant to be solidary with? And it comes down to goals, objectives, and politics. Now, One final word is that I am not someone who believes that all good things go together necessarily. That if you're anti-racist, you're feminist, and if you're feminist, I don't think it works that way, basically. So that is why, and I hope we'll come back to what constitutes feminist solidarity. There is a sort of optimistic sort of version of the feminist plus, which is that all good things, if you're green, if you're LGBT friendly, it's all, one big nice package, and there's another nasty one somewhere else. Well, I don't believe that, but I'm sure we'll have time to get back to that. So this is where I stand, and it's been a long, painful road, basically. Yeah. And thanks to Afghanistan, by the way, for my final wake-up call. Yeah.
Thank you so much, dear Deniz. And of course, we now have Shaharzad, who will be talking with us, who has been in Afghanistan throughout those times that you have been talking about. Shaharzad has had a life of solidarity, enacting solidarity, and she was the chairperson for Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission before August 15, when she had to leave. And since then, she has been in solidarity with us, with now the Ukrainian refugees and women and feminists. And I'm learning so much about how one can enact and embody solidarity from you, dear Shaharzad. So what would you have to say about what feminist solidarity means for you?
Thank you, Ayşe girl, for having me here. And I'm so honored, I'm so humbled to be part of this panel, and just blown away all day by the remarks of everyone, learning so much. And this has been a very difficult day, actually, for me. I think I have been between tears and rage all day because Taliban had promised to reopen secondary schools for girls across Afghanistan, and girls were turned away this morning. And so it has been, it's so good to be here because it just gives me hope when the situation back home is so hopeless, seems so hopeless and difficult. I really don't feel, despite your very kind words, Ayşe, I struggled with the question of feminist solidarity because I don't feel fully qualified to speak about it, because I'm not an academic, but as an activist and as a practitioner, I struggle to exercise feminist solidarity. I struggle to be a feminist, actually, because I think that we operate in the systems and structures that are so patriarchal, they're so misogynist, they're so institutionalized. We have been, at least in the society that I was raised to think being a woman is a crime, being born a girl is a crime. And it really goes very, very deep. And it's something that I have throughout my adult life tried to challenge, tried to expand my own understanding of what does it mean to a feminist. I do remember when I was younger, I had a very limited understanding of feminism, and a very patriarchal understanding, I would say. I thought I was a feminist, but many of the ways I judged women and many of the ways I categorized women were very much rooted in very patriarchal notions. And so it's constantly a struggle. But what it means to me today, feminist solidarity, it has been heartbreaking to think about this concept in light of what has happened in Afghanistan since August 15th, especially, because I really thought, I'll be very honest and frank here because we're among friends, I really thought that the form of gender apartheid that we see in Afghanistan would really lead to more outrage and more action. I have seen some action, I have seen some outrage, but it's insufficient to the scale of atrocity that we see every day. So it has made me question the strength of the feminist movement, to be honest. What does it mean when something like this is happening in a corner of the world and we're all acting like we are helpless or mostly helpless? regardless, what it means to me, feminist solidarity means to me is a continued and intentional breaking of barriers that the patriarchal society, the misogynist system has created and is trying to sustain. You really have to, for me, you really have to be intentional to not fall into these categories, to transcend these categories. And also you have to be very much aware of your own positionality, privilege, and power, which all the speakers reflected on. In the context of Afghanistan, that meant for me to really try to be aware of the fact that I'm educated, I speak English, I live in Kabul, unlike majority of my sisters in Afghanistan. And for me to have real solidarity, I can't deny the privilege that I have and move forward as if it's not a non-factor in my interactions with rural, illiterate Afghan women from across Afghanistan. And also in interactions, I'm also aware of my position in interactions with feminist women. I have been part of panels and initiatives where Hillary Clinton has been involved, or these big names in our world, people that you feel proud of as a woman, but you also feel very uncomfortable with because of their politics. And how does that work? So that's also another aspect of my struggle to try to understand feminist solidarity and exercise.
Thank you so much, dear Shaharzad. I mean, so many ideas coming from all of you about how to expand and critically rethink what we imagine solidarity to be. And Arlene had started talking about white supremacy and the need to look at privilege, and now you're kind of closing the circle with the same emphasis. I would love to hear in the second round, we would love to hear your experiences with solidarity, particular experiences with solidarity, which solidarity practices in the past or ongoing that you have organized, taken part in, witnessed, or researched. And all of you have done all of that, I know, so I don't know what you will want to pick on. Have inspired you the most or continue to inspire you? In other words, what better stories of feminist solidarity are there that inspire your thinking around solidarity, and what can we learn from them? So Arlene, shall we start with you again?
Okay. What I'm going to talk about is my latest activism. And it's not explicitly feminist, but I feel that it is in solidarity with communities of color. I'm a volunteer for something called the Movement Voter Project. They support a lot of feminist issues, and many of the people doing the work on the ground are women, many of whom identify as feminists. I'm part of a group in Massachusetts, a very liberal state, and we raise as much money as we possibly can for grassroots groups and communities of color across the country. These groups are led by people who live in the communities, are often raised in the communities. They know the people in the communities. They know what the issues are. They do not just come in for elections and then leave. They're building an infrastructure for long-term progressive change. That's why the group is called Movement Voter. The ultimate aim is to build a progressive movement and win elections for progressive candidates. So those of us in Massachusetts, and most of the volunteers are old white people, we raise as much money as we can, and we send it to the Movement Voter Project, and they distribute it to hundreds of groups all over the country. And the focus is communities of color and youth, the ones who can make the difference in elections and make change, progressive change for the long term. And this is the first time in my life as an activist and a scholar that I've worked with a group where I didn't have to ask all the time, well, what is the racial dimension of the work we do? Because white supremacy is centered and it makes all the difference. So this is very fulfilling to me. And we do what we can do. We raise the money. We do not go into these communities. We're not part of them, but we send them the money. And MVP also provides technical help for them. The other thing I've done with solidarity that's been very, very fulfilling, when I was chair of women's studies, I wanted to transform a mostly white department into one that had a majority women of color whose research was on women of color. I cannot say I was in solidarity with groups on campus, but I was in solidarity with women of color. And when I embarked on this goal at the University of Massachusetts, which again is a liberal institution, relatively speaking, out of 1,300 faculty, there was not one Black woman teaching on Black women from her research. And I set about to change that. Because I didn't think our curriculum could represent the lives of all women, including white women, without making that change in the faculty. And I accomplished this goal. And at the time, I believe women in gender studies at UMass was one of the few with this demographic on our faculty, which is a scandal. And the last thing that I want to talk about is something that I never thought that I would do or be involved in. As the daughter and granddaughter of survivors of the Armenian genocide, I never would have believed that I would have responded to this question with the work that Ayşe, Altınay, Fethiye and I have been engaged in for the last few years. We've had a series of structured conversations around gender, race, ethnicity, class, and sexuality, which we hope would soon be published in a book called Mirroring Lives Across the Armenian-Turkish Divide, Conversations on Race, Gender, and Genocide. Our decision to work on this project came out of the deep connections each of us felt to each other based on a shared political vision. The space between us has been a space for sharing pain and mourning as well as joy, sharing personal political journeys and co-witnessing and co-resisting. While we may have experienced this space as a healing place, that was not our goal or even desire. This is not a book of reconciliation, but a discussion about these issues from our different positionalities, each one hopefully illuminating the other. And it's been an amazing process. So those are my 3 experiences of solidarity.
Thank you so much, Arlene. Of course, you coming to Turkey to participate in the Hrant Dink Memorial Workshop focusing on gender, ethnicity, and the nation state in 2009 was an amazing act of solidarity with us and an amazing act of courage. And I have been so privileged to have been in this process with you.
Me too.
So, Cynthia, you coming to Turkey, I don't know how many times in the past almost 20 years each one of those physical visits and now virtual visits, you never refuse an invitation, and you have inspired so many of us here, and I know in other parts of the world as well. So who has inspired you is the question. Who have inspired you?
Well, I mean, I'm inspired by you. I'm inspired by SU Gender. I'm inspired by all of you who do all this work. And that's not being just polite. That's being very grittily accurate. That is, I'm expanded, right, Arlene? I'm expanded by you, I'm deepened by you, and I'm energized by you. And I think that's what solidarity, when you think you're living it, kind of check your pulse and feel, am I being deepened? Am I being broadened? Am I being energized? And being broadened, you know, it's like stretching. It's painful. You know, you don't know you're in solidarity if you're comfortable, for sure. You know, solidarity isn't getting into a warm bath. Solidarity is feeling as though, oh my God, who am I in this group? What am I in this group? You know, I've never thought that before. And I think, well, there are several occasions actually in Turkey. Ayşe, as some of you know, is one of my stretchers, right? And on my first visit, this is, oh boy, 2003, Ayşe, 2003. And Ayşe, I could tell, now she would not say this, she would be so much more polite. But in fact, she decided that I needed a good workout. You know, I needed to limber up. I needed to get on the, you know, treadmill and go up to speed here. And so she took me around Turkey. And in each place, in each setting, not just a place on a map, but in each setting, I was stretched. I was deepened, I was broadened, and I came away energized. When Ayşe took me to Diyarbakır, one of the high points, well, there were some difficult moments, not difficult for Ayşe and me, difficult because of Diyarbakır being such a tense and perilous place for so many people living there. But we went to the restaurant that was started by and run by the women of Khmer. And one night they closed the restaurant just so we could have a dinner amongst ourselves. And you remember this, Ayşe. And the women in Khmer began singing Kurdish songs in Kurdish. Well, I wanted to cry. It was so, I don't understand Kurdish, but it was so beautiful. And it was so, here's what solidarity felt like that night. I don't think I would have said it at the moment, but you've pushed us all to rethink things we thought we understood about our experiences. What I realized was that these women who are taking the risk of being in a Kurdish women's group in Diyarbakır in 2003, they trusted Ayşe and me for different reasons, much more Ayşe because she built trust amongst them. I was just parachuted in. They trusted us enough to close the doors and to sing. I mean, what kind of guts does that take, right? To trust people that you don't really know you can trust. To sing songs you haven't been allowed to sing. And I think of that, and I think of their solidarity. They're taking an enormous risk to show what mattered to them that had recently been illegal with somebody that they barely knew. So I think about their trust, building solidarity with me, who they barely knew. Another moment was more recent, and I think, boy, don't dates blurt. Isn't it awful? You now think, is that pre-COVID or post-COVID, or there's no post-COVID yet? So pre-COVID. So I think it was 2019. I think it was December. And maybe that was it, where Sugender created a conference in downtown Istanbul. And I love that former bank. I just love taking over capitalist space and turning it into feminist space. And I'm so glad the bank teller's windows are still visible there. It makes me laugh. Laughter is really important to solidarity, right? And in fact, if you can all laugh together, you're on your way to building trust, I think. Anyway, so I always laugh when I see the teller's windows. Anyway, behind which sat the translators. Thank you, dear translators. But what the lesson I learned there was women and men, but especially women in Turkey, in universities, were beginning to be fired from their positions because they were teaching gender studies, which the government had declared as not serious or even worse. And what Sugender did was create an academic conference. These were with formal papers, with presentations, had all the kind of feel, and it was a serious intellectual, even academic, not to be confused with intellectual, meeting. And the people that Sugender invited to be the formal presenters were amongst the people, were people who had just lost their academic jobs in Turkey. And it was, I've told this story to a lot of my academic friends around the world, that don't ever imagine that because somebody lose their letterhead, they have lost their intellectual value. Now, I know none of us would really ever admit that we think that, but it's amazing what happens when you lose letterhead. I'm talking about when we used to use stationery or on Zoom, a logo, a university logo. And what Sugender did was remind us all that solidarity is to continue to take seriously anybody who has feminist research, feminist interrogations, feminist investigations, and feminist analyses to share. That is what a community of feminist intellectual solidarity looks like. And because there's so much pressure on all of us in the world to care about these things called credentials and to reduce credentials to logos or to fancy words before or after your name, to create, as Sugender did in Istanbul in 2019, and this matters, this is as Deniz would say, this is a political moment, to have created that intellectual sharing space, I thought really taught me what solidarity can look like, because it has to be created. It takes imagination, it takes organizing, and it takes a kind of breadth of genuine understanding that gets underneath the letterhead, underneath the logos, underneath the titles. That was enormously energizing to me. Thanks.
Cynthia, thank you so much. I had no idea these would be the examples you would give, of course, and you are as generous as ever. I always say in your mirror, one thing's, one is that's everything is possible, really. That's, yeah, thank you. This is really incredibly generous of you. I'm deeply, deeply touched remembering both moments. And I actually want to say I feel so privileged to be at an institution, I mean, Sugender in particular, where we have all together co-created. In general, I mean, the feminist and LGBTI movement in Turkey in particular, and the Kurdish movement, and the Armenians and others who have faced so much, have created these spaces of solidarity and these acts of solidarity that have been so inspiring. I feel like we have been swimming in an ocean of solidarity learning, solidaritization, learning to act in solidarity and be inspired by each other. And of course, our colleagues, especially feminist colleagues, so many of whom have lost their jobs, are no longer able to teach at their universities. They have humbled us with what they have done, with this great injustice. Many of whom have recreated their lives and have come together and to empower each other and others. And Deniz Kandiyoti has been an amazing support, has been really with us through this process, supporting so many of our colleagues and feminist activists who are finding a way to rebirth ourselves, rebirth feminism in a context where it's constantly under attack. And one award that we give in the name of Shirin Tekeli, who had quit academia precisely because of these actions, and from whom we have learned so much about academic freedoms and solidarity and feminism. Deniz Kandiyoti has been so generously joined us in the jury to create that award, which brought us together with many young scholars who are doing incredibly inspiring creative work. So I will pass the word to Deniz Kandiyoti, still feeling very moved with what you have said, and very moved to be really in this amazing company. So please, Deniz.
You know, I think you're very generous, Ayşe. You know, I was doing all that stuff as what one does, you know, as a colleague, as a, you know, I don't rate myself so highly on the solidarity scale, because I have some real sort of people I look up to. And I think I want to take this occasion to talk about our departed but not forgotten friend, Cynthia Coburn, because Cynthia, you see, is a person who has been truly inspirational in my life. And I want to say a few words about Women in Black. Some of you may be familiar with Women in Black already. This is working with women on opposite sides of communal conflicts and very serious divides. And not only was Cynthia the driving force and inspiration, but she was also somebody who somehow managed to combine academic inquiry and publishing, very serious, good quality academic inquiry, with, you know, right at the coalface activism. And people like her are very rare, you know, and I admired that a lot. And I have to tell you why I thought this form of solidarity building was so precious, because common interests, precisely what she was doing. Well, you know, the truism that our identities are multiple and we're intersected by all sorts of things that mainly divide us, okay? And what can divide people more than being on opposite enemy sides of conflicts, right? So what Cynthia was doing there was telling the participants of the project to transcend the most difficult identity on earth, you know, which has to do with sort of very primitive blood and soil nationalism types of impulses. I mean, ultimately, these are almost impossible to transcend. I've also sometimes thought, why women, women in Black? I have a thing about not having women's movements that take you to essentialism. And I have that problem about ecofeminism. No, you know, women are not natural protectors of the environment. Similarly with peace, I don't believe there's any, you know, there are absolutely ferocious, you know, warmongering women on both sides of the divide. Yet, as in all forms of mobilization, it's a sort of an act of faith in a way, that you are going to suspend for the moment all the cynicism we have about identities and what is an identity, and forge one in movement, okay? And this is what Cynthia was able to do. And I respect this so deeply. As for myself, I think that my moments of solidarity came when I felt the most powerless. I'll start with Afghanistan. Again, you know, back there in UNIFER, here we were. People were making UN salaries and getting their per diems. And I was seeing that people were living in containers. I went back to the office and I was in tears. I said, first of all, I can't take this money. That's number one. And number two, there's nothing I can do. I'm useless. And it was my Afghan colleagues who said, no, don't worry. There is something you can do, you know, you can teach. We need cadres, you can teach. I had the same experience at Birzeit University in Palestine. I went and I said, totally, but there's nothing I can do. And they said, no, no, no, there is something you can do. We're setting up a women's studies center. You can help us. You can teach us. We can send you our PhD students. I thought that, you know, given the enormity of what was going on in these places, me on the margins, helping a few women here and there, didn't really amount to much. Really, Ayşe, you know, if you think about what was going on. But I thought in all humility, well, there's something you can do it, you know. And this is how I ended up in all the activities with Sabancı and all the various other universities where feminist colleagues were actually struggling. And they were struggling on two fronts, let me say. They were not only struggling with their own marginalization in very patriarchal contexts, they were also struggling with their Western academic colleagues, I dare say. Because, you know, they came in with paradigms that were sometimes really not helpful. For example, when they had grants and they had to meet some conditionalities, they had to toe the line of what was important to these institutions, which may have been really miles apart from what was going on in those societies. So when I was working in post-Soviet states after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was all sorts of money for violence against women. These were women who were being disempowered daily. Their free kindergartens were being shut down. The entire infrastructure that was supporting these women was being swept away under the label of so-called market reforms or privatization. And they were being told that, yes, if you want to set up an NGO and have money to combat violence against women, we can do that. So I thought that being from Turkey helped me to position myself where I could plainly see the workings of patriarchy. Hey, I was raised in Turkey, okay? I needed no maps, you know. But at the same time, I could see the blindness of the West, really, and its inability. I mean, when Shaharzad said, I was surprised there was no reaction. Why were you surprised, Shaharzad? Because when there was a conference in London, a donors conference, when it looked like it might be a good idea to talk with the Taliban, and we're talking about many years ago, already they had started saying, well, maybe it's their culture after all. So they were always ready to backtrack strategically when it didn't suit them. I was not surprised. So I have become jaded and cynical, but in the process, I must say, trying to somehow find a little way where I could still build bridges and continue to feel good about myself, because it's very easy to feel really lousy, you know, in these situations, especially if you're working for institutions that are based in the North, if you're working with aid agencies, as I was, if you're in the UN system, you know, it's a very uncomfortable life, actually. And I think that really these were my moments of inspiration, and Cynthia's namesake, another beautiful Cynthia, was a feminist inspiration, and not just to me. Yeah.
Certainly to all of us. So Cynthia Coburn is here in spirit, really. Absolutely. I mean, she resonates with us and through us in everything Absolutely. That we do. And thank you so much for bringing her visibly into this conversation, dear Deniz. And what you say is such a beautiful reminder of, you know, there's always something we can do wherever we are situated. And I know from where I am situated that what you have done for feminist scholars inside Turkey and outside is tremendous. It has changed many lives and it has had tremendous impact. So I'm truly grateful for everything that you have been for all of us. And dear Shaharzad, what would you say to feminist practices of solidarity that have inspired you?
Thank you, Ayşe. And once again, it's so good to listen to everyone. I think while we really, I mean, the Afghan community generally, men and women, I think all of us feel very heartbroken by lack of global solidarity, especially from the states. But I do think that I have witnessed acts of solidarity by institutions and by individuals that have been really, really moving and surprising. And this has happened, you know, universities opening up their doors to Afghan scholars, particularly to female scholars, but more generally to students. Communities opening up their doors, people trying to learn about Afghanistan, people trying to do something to help the situation. I remember I read somewhere that in August, one of the most Googled questions was, "What can I do for Afghanistan?" It was just this collective sense of individuals across the world that felt this is not okay, this is not just, and we need to do something. And so many people have approached me and other Afghans asking what they can do, what are the ways in which they can be helpful. And of course, women leaders, I have seen women leaders in structures where, in very patriarchal structures, trying to go beyond the structures and trying to stand in solidarity with Afghan women. I have seen women leaders in Indonesia and Qatar and in Pakistan, these countries that are not easy places for women to rise to positions of leadership, particularly formal leadership in governments, really trying to stand in solidarity, really trying to do more and to utilize their platform, sometimes at risk to themselves, at least political risk, to speak up in solidarity with Afghan women and Afghan women's aspirations. So that's something that gives me hope when a lot seems really hopeless. And in terms of participation, both witnessing and participation, really, I think since the so-called so-called peace process started between the US and Taliban. So in 2019, I started noticing this more. I realized that the Afghan women's rights movement, fragile as it was, fragmented as it was, challenged as it was daily by patriarchy, by the conflict, by corruption, by donor demands, and as critical of it as I was, it actually emerged as the only voice in the Afghan society that had some cohesiveness around what could the future could look like, what Afghans wanted from a peace process, what could dignity look like for Afghans. And of course, there were so many fractions within the movement. When we talk about movement, you know, there were people who didn't want to be in the same room and people who did not agree on a lot. But somehow all of us managed to get together to articulate a somewhat clear vision for what we want out of the peace process. And the minority groups, political leaders, all these other groupings in society that would be impacted by a bad peace process really failed to get their act together, right? The political leadership of the Republic, which was the main enemy of the Taliban, failed to get its act together and create some consensus and cohesion around what they wanted. They were so driven, these men in power, they were so driven by self-interest. They tore the country apart. But the only force that stayed somewhat consistent, and it was a struggle every day, was the women's rights movement, because we had so much to lose, I think. And it took an active practicing of solidarity, an active saying, okay, maybe I don't like some of these people, and maybe I have some questions about some of these people, but we really need to get together and write this letter or organize this protest or raise our voice in this way and amplify each other. And this was happening when we were being branded and pushed on multiple fronts. So every morning when I woke up as an Afghan woman, I felt like I'm fighting on multiple battlegrounds. I was fortunate I didn't have a battleground to fight at home. Many of my other comrades did. They had to fight in their own homes to do the work that they were doing, to leave the house, to do an interview. They had to fight their husbands or mother-in-law or father-in-law or the community around them. That was step one. And then as soon as you get on the street, there is harassment, there is pressure, there's people telling you they don't want you in the space, like literally telling you they don't want you in the space, but also in the virtual space, political space. It wasn't only the Taliban and their supporters or people in the government who want to delegitimize women. It was a lot of Western analysts who are watching Afghanistan who told us, you don't represent Afghan women. Afghan women are the only real Afghan women are the ruler women. And they hadn't talked to 5 ruler women in their lives, of course. None of them, very few of them had been to one village. But this constant delegitimization of our voice, not looking at the content of what we say, not looking at the content and saying the content of what you say is problematic for these reasons, but delegitimizing us as people, regardless of what we say, because to their eyes, we did not represent Afghan women. And it took real real courage for the Afghan women to stand together in that period. And I was inspired by that. There were many, many days that I wanted to just give up and stop repeating myself to different audiences who were constantly attacking. And I did, but there were many who didn't and many who haven't stopped. Until now, on the streets of Kabul, despite being detained and tortured and raped in detention. And I think that's where I get my inspiration from.
Thank you so much, Shaharzad. Really, it's been humbling to see the work that you have done, in your own country for the past years, and the Afghan women like you who are now exiled and those who are in Afghanistan are doing on a daily basis. It's really humbling and deeply empowering and inspiring for us. And I also wanted to remark that I was so happy to see that an important network of feminists in Turkey organized around the Istanbul Convention, but beyond, the Women's Platform for Equality, EŞİK, organized probably the first global meeting of solidarity action with Afghan women. 2 days after, on the 17th or 18th of August, a few days after, inviting Afghan feminists to talk about what we can do for women in Afghanistan and expressing the outcry and also asking for solidarity. So cheers and gratitude to our colleagues and they continue to organize meetings. So in Turkey, we became well informed, and also we were able to get together. And of course, you're being here in Turkey for the past few months. Now you are not, but you have been an inspiring source of inspiration and learning for us all. I really feel deeply humbled by what you have been able to do also in exile. And I want to read two tweets that you wrote in the past month that I think are so telling and inspiring. Around March 8th, you wrote, "As an Afghan woman, it's hard to have hope or see light now. It's a battle every day. Solidarity can be a source of hope, a source of strength. Extend your solidarity to women in Afghanistan. Refuse to normalize the gender apartheid of Taliban. Maybe together we can find some light." It's such a beautiful call to all of us. And it was also very humbling for me to see you tweeting about what's happening in Ukraine. And I'm just going to read one of those tweets that was also heart-opening and mind-opening for me. You wrote, "Reliving our trauma with the brutal conflict in Ukraine and its devastating impact on civilians, families, children. Sending love and solidarity to Ukrainians and desperately hoping for peace in Ukraine and across the world. No one should have to face these heartbreaking conditions." And we know that the response to the Ukrainian crisis has been very different, to the Ukrainian refugees has been very different to the response that we've seen to Afghan refugees or Syrian refugees, particularly in Europe. And yet you're able to move beyond that and really offer your love and solidarity to the Ukrainians, I think is, yes, very inspiring, to say the least. Thank you. So I'm aware of the time, but I will still ask our third question, if that's okay with everyone. And then we'll move to discussion and perhaps give a short break. So the third question that we wanted to discuss with you all today was actually two questions in one. One is, how does solidarity transform us personally and collectively? And how do you see the future of solidarity, both as a concept and as practice? Arlene, shall we start with you again?
Yeah, I'm going to speak just briefly because of the time and because I realized that in preparing my remarks, I went back to you and coming to Turkey and how that was had changed me so much. And I came in 2009, and it was a place of mourning for me because I had tremendous losses in 2008. And I entered into the space of mourning for Hrant Dink. And, you know, I mean, growing up with my sense of Turkey being a land of mass murderers because of my experience of my family, my grandfather being disappeared and my grandfather being, grandmother and mother, aunt and uncle being exiled, or whatever you want to call it, taken out of Kastamonu into another place, and her son taken away. She got him back. Coming to Turkey, I never, ever thought would be a place of healing. And I'm not a person who uses that word lightly, healing. But I think I want to go back to something that Cynthia raised about trust. You trusted me, and I trusted you, which was very surprising to me. And I trusted you because of your politics. And I recognized in you something very similar that I experienced in relationship to women of color. You were so careful in your response to me when I said, well, you know, all of my work is on the genocide, which was a lie, you know, and your response to me was so similar to the response I would have given to a woman of color I invited to a conference. You said, oh, we know your work. You said, you are not the only one. All of this was building trust, which I think is related to the kind of healing that I experienced. And of course, our work together on the book was very, very powerful. And then I tripped to Kastamonu. So my family was from Kastamonu. I knew nothing about this place. And ever since I started to come to Turkey, and I came to Turkey 10 times, I believe, between 2009 and 2019. My partner, who has since died, and Ayşe kept saying, you have to go to Kastamonu. You have to go there. And I was like, no, I don't want to go there. You know, I know nothing about it. You know, what am I supposed to feel? Am I going to try to feel something that I'm supposed to feel? But eventually, I listened to them, and it was 2015, and we went there. And again, it was so profound because I was walking these ancient streets that perhaps my mother had walked when she was learning to walk. I went to a bastama shop that my grandmother might have bought bastama at. We went, and you know, towards the end of the afternoon, I said, I have to have a drink. And Ayşe said, I don't know if you can get a drink in this city. And then there was a hotel. It was an ancient place. And we asked the waiter, you know, Ayşe did, what had that hotel been? And he said, oh, it used to be a textile mart. And I knew nothing about so little about my grandfather. And the one thing I know is that he dealt in textiles. So we sat in a place where he might have worked. And I guess I've been so changed by that. And the trust that we built is still amazing to me, but it's in my heart and it's in my soul, and it has changed me so much. So thank you. And the only other thing I wanted to say about this was that I am so grateful for the Black and other people of color, but mostly my connection is mostly with Black people, their generosity. You know, the generosity to take the time to school this white woman who was just kind of struggled through my own racism, my own connection to white supremacy. You know, it's the scholars going back to Du Bois and the people who really took me under their wing. And again, I say it with great generosity. Why did I deserve this? You know, so they trusted me, and I tried to live up to that trust. And that also changed me, and it freed me in a way. I mean, I think white people don't understand, or people in positions of societal power don't understand how limited we are and how distorted we are by holding on to these positions of power. I mean, we kind of can't give it up, but if we can see through it, we can be free.
Arlene, again, I'm so moved. I mean, talking about solidarity as healing and as liberating is moving in itself. And I will just reflect that response to you, to your generosity. We are so grateful with each visit and everything that you have shared. You have also contributed to our healing and to our liberation. So deep, deep gratitude to you. Thank you. Here is Cynthia.
Stamina.
Mm-hmm.
I think the lesson I've learned, and well, you keep learning a lot. If there's any lesson you're learning, make sure you don't think you've ever really learned it. You know, right? That's death, right? So the lesson I keep learning is you've got to have stamina, and stamina takes more forms than you could ever imagine. And early on, I think, Ayşe, you used the word modesty as part and parcel of sustaining solidarity, building it and then sustaining it. And modesty, I think, fuels stamina. And modesty doesn't mean you're not bold in your ambitions. It doesn't mean you're not a risk taker. It doesn't mean you don't feel your life is perilous. That can go along with modesty. But I think this is my feminist lesson to myself, or that all of you, and all of you on this call, I've probably talked to half of you at some point, so you're all my tutors, is I try really hard never to become cynical. I think I've thought about cynicism a lot more, maybe administrations in this country, but things happening in the world, is that every anti-feminist wants me to become cynical. Because if they can drive me into cynicism, they can make sure that I never have the stamina to pursue difficult, enriching, sustainable solidarities. So I watch every day for any inkling of cynicism. And the opposite of cynicism is not being a Pollyanna, not being unrealistically optimistic. That's not the opposite of cynicism. The opposite of cynicism is engagement, I think. But to stay engaged means you have to stay a learner. To stay engaged means you have to stay a listener. To stay engaged means you have to constantly stretch. And that takes energy and ability to embrace discomfort. But that's what feminism really calls for. But it also enables stamina.
Thank you, Cynthia. Modesty, stamina, constantly stretching is something that I've learned from all of you here, really. And I feel like this is a question about being transformed. I feel that I have been transformed by each and every one of you, and I'm transformed right now in this very conversation. So, dear Deniz, Kandiyoti, what would you say about how solidarity transforms us personally and collectively, and how we
Right. I think Ayşe is momentarily frozen. Can you hear me? Are we on? I think
I can hear you.
The rest of us are on.
Okay. Somehow, don't you get the sense Ayşe is with us? But
oh no, there she's back.
There she is.
You're back. Suddenly, there was a moment when you were frozen there, you know, sort of mid-sentence. I think maybe this third question also has an implicit future of solidarity question in it, folded in it. And this is something I have been reflecting on. I think that what Cynthia has to say between, you know, the Pollyanna cynicism continuum is one we have to struggle with every single day, you know, as you refresh your stamina, or try to anyway. But I think that what happens with the future of solidarity is that we have to imagine new types of solidarity. I think that we've got to look at this moment with fresh eyes. Because I really felt, when you asked me to participate in this panel, I felt quite unequal to the task. I said, I haven't thought about solidarity explicitly ever, I don't think. So I started reading. And what I discovered is that there is, if you like, a revival of solidarity talk. And I think it's probably really directly related to what's been happening lately in the world, and especially in the States. Look at 2017, the Women's March all of a sudden, then the global women's strike. I think that there is a kind of reactive thing going on, because there is actually an onslaught, what Nancy Fraser calls hyper-reactionary neoliberalism, by which she means that, you know, heads of state have no problem about being openly misogynistic, you know, making the crudest racist comments, the crudest sexist comments, and it becoming quite mainstream. And I think that there was a kind of, I'm not going to say people were lulled into a sense of discomfort, that some ideas had become mainstream, surely, that some things had been established, that we couldn't really talk about women's bodies in certain terms anymore. And then suddenly discovering that, no, this is all very fragile. And we can be now, of course, this is a Western phenomenon. I don't think anybody in Afghanistan was for 1 minute lulled into any sense of comfort, because they were always on the back foot. But there was a sort of illusion of some kind of cultural hegemony, of some feminist ideas painstakingly moving into the mainstream, and the discovery suddenly that, no, it may all evaporate. And therefore the need to find broader platforms and firmer barricades. so that the plus, you know, becomes a genuine plus, where you're really looking around for allies everywhere, you know, and because I think I personally feel that feminism is in retreat in some ways. It's beleaguered in a way that it wasn't before, you know. I didn't think as a young woman in the 70s and in the 80s that I would find myself at my age having to listen to alt-right interviews. Actually, there was a fascinating documentary with one of your up-and-coming young alt-writers, Nick Fuentes and so on. This is a British documentary maker who said, well, he said to one of those guys, not Fuentes, another one, and what do you think about women voting? And he said, well, you know, really, honestly, I'm quoting, I really don't think, you know, they should vote, basically. I mean, women should be in the home. And I'm like, please, you know, 19th century. So I think the reason why solidarity has always been important, no question about that. But this revival in solidarity talk, I think pushes us to reflect on the moment we're in, basically. And I don't know what the answers are, but I think that some, I don't know, some glimmers here and there were provided by some of the youth movements in the Middle East, actually. I was very inspired by some of the youth in the Arab uprisings, and before that in Iran in 2009. That was quite interesting because these were young women who were saying, I'm not a feminist. And then proceeding to expound what every one of us would recognize as a feminist consciousness. Okay, so there's a kind of a post-feminist moment. We're their mothers, and they're different. They think we're fuddy-duddy. But what do they want? They want to overthrow the regime, on the other hand. Okay. And guess what? The boys feel the same, and they're together. And we saw some of these broad-based phenomena on the streets of Istanbul, you know, with people you wouldn't think would be capable of mingling and coming together. So I think maybe we should be thinking broadly about moments, temporalities. It's clear that we're in very different moments in different parts of the world. I mean, in many places, we're still at the point where women are, you know, trying for franchise. You know, in Saudi Arabia, they were barely just allowed to vote in municipal elections. So what we have to understand is that there is no global feminist moment, that there are very different temporalities, very different types of consciousness, and yet we are so beleaguered and weak that we have to find a common language somehow. So this is what I feel at the moment is the main challenge that I'm trying to grapple with. Not to stay in my bubble, that would be comfortable, trying to reach out, and especially trying to reach out to younger people, much younger people, trying to have dialogues across generations, across colors. You know, there's a lot I need to learn, I find, because I find some of these encounters uncomfortable. I have no time to tell you why, but I do. But maybe, as Cynthia said, if you're not feeling uncomfortable, you're not doing the right thing. So, you know, let's hope I'm on the correct track there. I think we need to worry about the future now, really, seriously.
Thank you, dear Deniz. As usual, we always add new layers of critical thinking and reflection, and yes, thinking about the intergenerational conversations around solidarity and the great diversity of our experiences around the globe, and yet the possibility of learning from one another. is really significant and inspiring. So, dear Shaharzad, what would you have to say about how solidarity transforms us and how you see its future from where you stand?
Thank you, Ayşe. Those are both very difficult questions, really. I think in terms of the future, just going back to where we started with Arlene when she talked about, having knowledge of awareness of what's happening and then action. That admittance of the fact that that so much is wrong and unjust. I do think that for me, what I hope to gain more insight to as I move, how I hope to become better in solidarity is by trying to learn more, what's happening in different places. And, the Ukrainian example, you also talked about it. It has been I have never been to Ukraine. I have no Ukrainian friends, but it has been just so painful to watch and follow that sometimes I'm tempted to not, because it reminds me of my own childhood when we lived in the city and urban warfare, and me learning about deaths and violent death when I don't think I should have learned about violent death then. And then thinking about all the children that I see on the news and them facing this, me worrying at 5-6 years of age about losing my parents to violence. And so it's hard, but it's also necessary to keep watching, to bear witness. And I think in bearing witness, then trying to educate ourselves, and that maybe makes us a little better in solidarity, take the first step in that process of solidarity. And when I was in the US, when I was a student, they are really learning about, I think what really changed my experience was learning about the racism and the struggle against racism, the structural racism there. And also the struggle of the LGBTQI movement. And because I, as a young woman in the US, when I went to the US, I was just 19 years old. I had never lived in the West. I had been a refugee before, but in Pakistan. And I went with all ideas about what America is and what America is about. And I was very naive about America's mission also to save Afghanistan, something that Deniz was talking about earlier. And when I went there, I faced all sorts of curiosity. As an Afghan woman, as a young Afghan woman, some very condescending and patronizing curiosity, which made me feel lonely and misunderstood, and which made me think more about being a Muslim woman and trying to find things in common with other people. So thinking more about, what does it mean to be a Muslim woman? But I also faced and met open curiosity and empathic curiosity from people. And, these were people my age from different parts of the world. And I think where I learned or saw solidarity was in that empathic curiosity. When a young woman from Brazil, now she's one of my close friends, when she wanted to learn about Afghanistan, she genuinely didn't know what was going on in Afghanistan. But in her curiosity, there was so much empathy. There was this recognition that we are both people, we are both human, we are both equal. That was not always the curiosity that I came across. There was also forms of curiosity that were very alienating or sort of disturbing and not in a good way. So I hope I can cultivate the kind of empathic curiosity that will help me be better in solidarity. Both with Afghans, I don't think, sharing a nationality means that you are necessarily better in solidarity with people from your own country. Both with Afghans and Afghan women and women in the Afghan women's movement, but also with activists and feminists from across the world who are battling very different kinds of injustice. And, initially when I went to the US, I had never in my life met someone who had talked, who I knew was not heterosexual. And it was baffling to me. I couldn't talk to my parents about lesbians and Smith, there were lesbians. And I was so baffled. And initially, to be honest, I was appalled because I didn't understand, right? And it's just people who taught me there about having open curiosity that really changed my understanding of gender in a very fundamental way. Because if I had talked to people back home, it was clear what they would say about all of this and how to confront all of this. So I think there are still ways that I really fall short of empathic curiosity, and that fall short of solidarity. And I do think that as a movement, the feminist movement, we should really work more on empathic curiosity. Maybe that will help us strengthen then our solidarity, our capacity for solidarity.
Thank you so much, Shaharzad. I mean, at the end of this almost 2 hours, I feel so enriched, and there's so many new ideas. And I feel like this dynamic way of responding to each other, picking up from one has left and adding on to it has been really amazing. So we've talked about solidarity as process, solidarity as something that stretches us, teaches us, uncomforts us, solidarity as struggle, solidarity as sometimes troubling in the forms that it takes, solidarity as trust building, solidarity as stamina building, solidarity as healing, as liberating, as bearing witness, solidarity as co-learning, and solidarity, as Shaharzad was talking about, as empathic curiosity, as open curiosity, and how to build our capacity for that. And I mean, you put it so beautifully, brought it together so beautifully. Solidarity is being able to look at what is difficult, look at what is difficult for another, also what is difficult for me, and to hold hands as we look at that, or to try to hold hands, to see if we can stand together, looking at these difficult realities, to the uncertain future that we have as a planet, and to see how we can come together and reimagine it in ways that it will survive for all species, including us, and in fact, as the incredible creative space that it can be for all of us to thrive in. And certainly I feel that I have been humbled, and I have been deeply inspired by the great wisdom and insight that all of you have offered. And I feel truly grateful, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So I will, we would like to reflect. I think we will end the recording here, right, Begum? And we would like to reflect some of the writing that people have done, and that's people who have been joining us in this conversation. And our speakers can perhaps take a short break as we